we're very aware of the shooting at Florida State University. First reports are always wrong, so I'm not going to give you any details about anything because I can't trust anything, but I will keep my eye on it. I do want to begin, though, by introducing Chris Rufo to you. Those of you who've been listening for a long time know that Chris is with the Manhattan Institute. He authored really one of the more important books of the decade in America's Cultural Revolution, and he's been following the Harvard story as I have. Chris, welcome back. Good to have you. Tell me first, just generally, what's your take on the Harvard controversy? Oh, we're muted or you're muted. So we'll figure it out. And I will tell people as we do that the Florida State reports are very contradictory. So that's why I don't want to speculate about anything, because when you have contradictory reports in 2 hours. Let's go back to Chris now and see if it's working. Nope. We have to go back to the beginning. I will read for you then, while we wait for Chris, the statement earlier today of former Harvard President Lawrence Summers. Any self-respecting Treasury Secretary would resign rather than have the department be complicit in the weaponization of the IRS against a political adversary of the president. Harvard will endure, and it is far, far from perfect, but if this directive is not withdrawn, the administration will have taken another substantial step away from the rule of law and democracy. Secretary Scott Bessent is derelict with respect to what may be his most important duty, maintaining law-based rights respecting our tax collection system, DOGE violating privacy rules, evisceration of the enforcement capacity, politicization of the leadership, and the political intrusion into a specific taxpayer status. The result will be losses of trillions of dollars or more over the next decade, the erosion of American democracy that has costs that cannot be priced. George Shultz met his test by facing down President Richard Nixon when his staff tried to interfere with IRS. Tragic that Secretary Scott Bessent has not protected the IRS. Now, that's so overwrought and so ridiculous. I just point out three things. Harvard is not above the law. No one is. Harvard was found to have discriminated on the basis of race against Asian American applicants. And then finally, Harvard is plagued by systemic anti-Semitism, which is on video, which you have seen, which I have seen, which everyone has seen. So we all know what Harvard's problems are. They got a letter from the Department of Education, a couple other agencies saying you got to do these 6 things, work with us, and Harvard said, off with you, go away. That's not for you to concern yourself with. Well, they got $9 billion, and there is Title VI. And Title VI is enforceable, and the $9 billion is cut-offable, and tax-exempt status has been canceled in the past when it came to Bob Jones University in 1983. And it doesn't matter if you don't like or respect Bob Jones University. What matters is they were found to have been in non-compliance with the civil rights law of the United States, and they lost their tax-exempt status, and the Supreme Court upheld that determination 8-1. Because if you're not in compliance with the civil rights statutes of the United States, you're not a charitable organization or an educational organization in the eyes of the United States. So Harvard is a great risk, and their hubris is growing. Their hubris is not being diminished. Earlier in the day, the Financial Times covering this went and found a Harvard faculty member who said that the university had to do what it did because it can't give in. Here's the quote. Staff members said that Harvard leadership had no option but to stand up to the White House. The demands were Maoist in nature, said Brian Enos, a political scientist at the university's School of Government. Quote, it was so wildly out of sync with the American tradition that it's not surprising the leadership refused. It is not, I just told you, it's not out of sync with the American tradition. You don't get tax-exempt status unless you meet certain criteria, unless you keep them. Universities have lost that tax-exempt status before, just like universities have lost their accreditation before. No one's saying that Harvard can't fix its problems and shouldn't be allowed to fix its problems. Chris Rufo is back now. Hi, Chris. I've summarized Lawrence Summers and other things. What's your take on the Harvard situation?
Well, it's a very simple question. The question that no one on the left seems to want to answer is, what is the relationship between the government and universities that accept, in Harvard's case, billions of dollars of public funds. And the Trump administration has very wisely said, if you want to continue to collect taxpayer largesse, you have to follow the letter of federal law, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Harvard has a history of flagrant, open, and repeated racial discrimination, racial segregation, racial scapegoating. We've seen this, over the years, and the Harvard administrators seem to believe that as long as their discrimination is against whites, Asians, and Jews, they don't need to worry about it. The Trump administration is saying you have to comply with federal civil rights law in order to receive federal funds. I think this is a smart policy, and I think that Harvard, if it's smart, should come to the negotiating table and to correct the discriminatory policies that are currently in place.
The acting president of Harvard quickly dismissed, less than 96 hours after a 6-page, very carefully worded letter arrives from the Department of Education and other agencies telling we got to work on governance and leadership reform, merit-based hiring, merit-based admissions, international admissions, viewpoint diversity in admissions and hiring, reforming programs with egregious records of anti-Semitism or other bias, discontinuation of DEI, student discipline reform, whistleblower reporting and protection, transparency. 5-page letter. It's very specific, and they say, go away. They don't give a substantive response. I believe that, like, de facto admission on their part that they can't fix the university. How do you judge their response to that letter?
Well, look, Ivy League university presidents are actually in a difficult situation. They know deep down that racial discrimination is wrong, that the universities have gone haywire, that many of their departments have been captured by ideology, but they don't have the internal strength to actually implement reforms. So they try to maintain this status quo where they just keep dancing into the future without actually addressing these problems. That's probably what's at play here with the president of Harvard, also the president of Princeton. But that really just strengthens the Trump administration's position because they can say, you have to comply or you are no longer eligible for these funds or you're no longer eligible to have tax exempt status. The law is on the side of the Trump administration. The money is on the side of the Trump administration. It's really hard to see how Harvard can maintain the status quo. And so I think that the administration should really lay into this and actually make good on some of these threats and show that, look, civil rights law is now not not an optional thing. You actually have to comply with the law. That's a very strong position. And I saw a headline today that Harvard researchers were considering euthanizing research animals if they don't get the federal money. So in essence, they're holding these animals hostage. And they're willing to euthanize innocent animals because they don't want to give up being able to violate civil rights law. I think that tells you everything that you need to know about the priorities of these institutions.
Now, Chris, in your book, America's Cultural Revolution, you trace how critical theory, it actually begins at Harvard Law School, and it spreads everywhere throughout the university through Marcuse and others, as you illustrate. It is no small irony that its collapse, and with it DEI's collapse, is coming home on the head of Harvard. I'm glad that they went in high. They didn't go for a small target. They went for Columbia and Harvard to start with. And I praise them for that because they have the means to defend themselves with. The federal government can't roll them. And that's why I'm not worried about injustice here. Are you worried about injustice here?
I'm worried about injustice in the sense that if the administration doesn't get Harvard to comply with its basic responsibilities, because what's happening at Harvard right now is an injustice. The status quo at the Ivy League universities is a form of injustice. And so the president and his department heads should use aggressive tactics to try to remedy these wrongs. And so the Harvard point in particular is a poetic return because Harvard manufactured the ideology of critical race theory. It exported this ideology to America's institutions. But now the flaws in this ideology are starting to actually, flower into being. You have Harvard's former president, Claudine Gay, who really rose on the ideologies of critical race theory and DEI. She's no longer there because she was a serial plagiarist and much of her academic work was compromised by academic fraud. And now you have the institution as a whole being put in the spotlight. And what Americans are starting to see is discrimination, stereotyping, segregating, not enforcing the basic rules of conduct that are required in universities. And so I don't have any, sympathy for those administrators who want to continue down this path. They really need to stop, and I think that that's what's coming.
Chris, if you were going to actually try and reform Harvard and you were having a conversation off the record with Garber, their acting president, what would you tell him to do?
Well, look, I've had a conversation with a number of people at Harvard, behind the scenes, off the record, and what I told them is exactly what I would tell the interim president, Alan Garber. I would say you have to figure out how to adjust your administrative policies so that they comply with the principle of colorblind equality. You don't discriminate in admissions, in hiring, in other decisions of university administration. You have to abolish the DEI program, which is really designed to violate civil rights law. And then beyond that, you have to start to rebalance the faculty and to reorient the academic enterprise towards truth and away from ideology. That's a long-term goal. That's going to take significant investment, and it'll take some time. But look, Harvard has done it before. When the faculty became unbalanced, when the faculty was not pursuing knowledge and truth with high standards, they made changes. And I'm confident that that could happen again in the future because, Harvard built a reputation over almost 400 years. They've torched that reputation in the past 5 years. It's cost them money. It's cost them prestige. It's cost them now potentially billions of dollars in federal funds. At some point, the pain is going to be so enormous that they have to reform. I hope they do so sooner rather than later.
I agree with you on that. Christopher Rufo, thank you for joining me today. His book, which is the primer you all need, is called America's Cultural Revolution. How did we get here? Chris has laid it out for you in America's Cultural Revolution. Thank you, Christopher Rufo.
Thank you.
I want to remind you to wait for Victor Davis Hanson to connect that the American Legislative Exchange Council is our great sponsor, ALEC. Go to alec.org, 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 and you'll be connected with them. And if you go to alec.org/Hugh, you can sign up for their weekly newsletter on what is going on in the states. Yesterday, Texas passed universal school choice, just yesterday. So that's the kind of thing everyone ought to know about. I know about because I follow alec.org, and I also follow the news about school choice. The American Legislative Exchange Council will tell you the details of what's going on in every state that's doing this. Jonathan William, their president and chief economist, who's on the show quite a lot, will expand on it. Also want to remind you that the new edition of Rich States, Poor States is out. That's available for free from ALEC. If you go to richstatespoorstates.com, richstatespoorstates.com. And it's fun. That's why I leave it in the guest room. I want people to know that it's there. If you are missing Dennis Prager, we have a little bit here to tease you with.
All right, here it goes, my friends. What do you argue about? In the spirit of full disclosure, the only arguments my wife and I have are in the car about my driving. To say backseat driver about my wife is not even to begin to describe what happens in the car.
I think that's probably true about most married couples. And however, with Dennis, Sue has the absolute right, because I've driven with Dennis and it's an adventure. And not sure that I'm going to fault Sue on that. But if you're missing Dennis, we hope you'll be back in June. And in the meantime, you can join Pragertopia. The other thing I'm going to tell you about is Consumer Cellular. Now, I began to tell you about Consumer Cellular this week because I got my new Consumer Cellular phone. And I want to let you know, if you want to keep your number and you want to shift all your contacts, you love the idea of 2 lines for $60 a month with unlimited data, and you're worried that it's complicated, I want to change my, that's cheaper, I could save some money, get 2 lines and unlimited data. You've got one of those old unlimited data plans. You don't want to lose that. They've got that. 2 lines, unlimited data, $60 a month. What they also have is a consumer help center right here in the U.S., many of them. And they will be talking to you within 30 seconds of your dialing their number. There's one, choose ABC, push 1, 2, 3, and then you're talking to a human being. And it takes about 20 minutes to switch. The service is crystal clear, the equal of any service in the United States. And you won't know until you try it, but I guarantee you, it is just absolutely the best. You don't have to get a new number, but you can get a new number if you want. You can bring your contacts with you. You don't have to re-enter your emails. You don't have to do any of that stuff. You get a new device. You can bring your old device, consumercellular.com, or call them. All right, Consumer Cellular is a phone number, 800-411-4454. 1-800-411-4454. Now, I got to Consumer Cellular because I had to get a second phone. Lots of you don't want a second phone. You want one phone, and you want that one phone to be cheaper. Well, I wanted my one phone to be cheapest, so I went to Consumer Cellular, and I got the 8 gigabytes plan because I'm not doing data there. No matter where you are, whatever you're on the gigabyte, how much data you use, whether you're on for 5 minutes a day or 23 hours a day, Consumer Cellular has a plan for you. But their target demo is people who are 50 years and older because they use less data. And they may not want to pay for the unlimited data plan that they had when they had kids in the house who were sharing lines. They may be getting older. They may be shedding lines. The time to change is now. The effortless way to do it is with Consumer Cellular. I mean, effortless. I spend an hour on the phone. I don't take on new clients very easily. I have to be persuaded that it's in their best interest and my best interest. And I know you get lots of offers from lots of different cellular companies. I can only tell you one thing. They are excellent, and they make it easy, and they make it fast, they make it affordable, and if you want just the cheapest possible plan, you can go with them. And if you want unlimited data, it's still cheaper than big cellular. Get away from big cellular. So unlimited data, 50 and older, they're for you. Not so much data and cheaper, they're for you. You want to save everything? You want everything to come over? They're for you. You want a standalone phone like I did for a second reason? ConsumerCellular.com. They're for you as well. Remember, ConsumerCellular.com/Hugh. All right, ConsumerCellular.com/Hugh. 1-800-411-4454. I'm still standing by for Victor. We had a connection and then it failed. And that happens sometimes whenever we connect with home machine. So we'll continue to keep trying to bring him up here. But I really want to talk to him about Harvard. I really want to talk to him about Iran. I do not pay any attention to the New York Times story about what President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu talked about. I don't know who leaked that. I don't know if it's a real leak. I don't know if it's a head fake on Iran. I don't know. But it's a very lengthy story in the New York Times today about the debate, an alleged debate within the administration between people who want to encourage Israel with our help to strike Iran's nuclear program versus those who don't want to do that. I don't know if any of it's true. New York Times has been so wrong so often about Donald Trump that they get played a lot. They got played on Russia, Russia, Russia. They got played on all sorts of different things. And I think they're probably getting played again. Maybe not by Donald Trump. Joined now by Victor Davis Hanson, one of our legendary guests, and now you can get his podcast over at the Salem Podcast Network. It's absolutely a must listen to. Victor, good to see you, and a happy Easter to you if you're celebrating. I got so much to cover with you in 4 segments. Let me start rapid fire. What do you make of Harvard's decision to throw down on President Trump and say we're not changing anything?
Well, they're not quite like Hillsdale. Hillsdale says that regardless of the administration, they will not take federal money because they don't feel that they'll enforce the Constitution. But Harvard's selective. It says we're not going to obey, but we do want federal money, and our policy depends on whether it's a Republican or Democratic administration. When there were Democratic presidents and they went after Hillsdale or they went after Grove City, or they didn't say a word. So they had no problem with the government using federal funds as a lever, or even interfering in private colleges that didn't take it. But I don't think they're going to win this, because once the word gets out about how much their endowment is and their income, I think people won't be sympathetic to this huge conglomerate getting that much federal money anyway. I think they
Well,
opened
the
a can
Supreme
of
Court
worms they didn't
ruled 2
expect.
years ago they have discriminated on the basis of race against Asian Americans in
Yes.
admissions. And the anti-Semitism there is systemic, and we've all seen it. I really don't
Yeah.
understand Interim President Garber saying, nah, we're not going to pay attention to the letter we got from the Department of Education. It's hubris, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And they wouldn't, I mean, the federal government, as you remember with Bob Jones in 1970, they went after them and said, if you're having statutes against interracial dating, you're subject to the civil rights legislation, and cut them off completely. And there's a lot of precedent for that. But this is very political. It's when Obama was president, he went after Hillsdale in a way. He wouldn't even include them on evaluations of private colleges for jobs, or the efficacy of majors as far as employment. He deliberately kept them off. Michigan legislature went after Larry Arndt, but Harvard didn't say a word. So I don't think they're even arguing on the principle that the federal government or the state government or any government doesn't have a right to predicate their funding on certain conditions. I just think they think they're Harvard, and I don't know, they think they're above the law. It's part of the old neo-Confederate idea of the sanctuary cities too. We can do whatever we want, and we're entitled to federal funds.
Well, I approve of the Trump administration going after Harvard and Columbia first, because they have the means to defend themselves. They're not being picked on. They're not a small school. They get $9 billion. They have a $53 billion endowment. And I think it's a prudential move by the team Trump to go after them first. Victor, we're at the artificial point of 100 days. I wrote a column about this for Fox News today, simply because it's such an artificial exercise. I wanted to get ahead of the rush. Let's get your take on Donald Trump out of the gates.
Well, I try to. There's been two presidencies of the 20th centuries that were as dynamic and holistic, and that was the Reagan Revolution and FDR's revolution. And I think, and this isn't really a revolution; it's a counter-revolution. And I think it's more comprehensive and more dynamic than either one of them. I mean, he's addressing every social, cultural, economic, political, military issue that he can as quickly as he can. He's overloading the zone, and everybody said he's herky-jerky, but in fact, he's making his opponents herky-jerky. They don't know what to do, and they're in this Orwellian situation where they're championing as the iconic figures, Mr. Khalil or Mr. Garcia or Carmelo Anthony or Luigi Mangione. These are not people that are going to resonate to the public, but they're desperate. Anything that Trump touches, they're opposed to, and they don't think it out.
Now, Victor Davis Hanson, AOC raised $9 million in the first quarter. And to me, that's one of the facts that sticks out as to where the left in the country is going. They're not trying to move to the center as Bill Clinton tried to move to the center after 3 terms of Reagan and Bush. They're moving to the left. And I don't mean just the left, I mean the far left. Do you think they can put the brakes on that or have any intention of trying to do so?
No, it reminds me of the McGovern movement that went way out of, they were going to cut, I think they were going to cut half the carriers and give guaranteed income to everybody. And they didn't learn. And they have to go through this trajectory. And I think they're going to nominate a very radical person. And I think they're going to get a lot of great press and money in the primaries, and they're going to lose in the general. And then it takes 2 defeats. Then they'll come to their senses and look at somebody like Josh Shapiro or something like that, or the governor of Tennessee. But I don't think they're there yet. I think they would rather be ideologically pure and lose than move to the center and win.
Now, having mentioned Governor Shapiro, Democrat of Pennsylvania, almost killed this week. Arsonist in his home. The fire was significant. It burned quite a lot. His family was with him on the night of Passover after they had celebrated Passover. And he's obviously a crazed individual like the person who has shot up Florida State today. We don't know the details of that yet. Is violence being mainstreamed in the way it was in 68, 69, and 70, Victor?
It's very, I was thinking of that. It's very reminiscent because you had people in the Democratic Party that just would not come out and condemn the Weatherman Underground or even the Symbolize Liberation Front.
Oh, you're
Really, when
right.
I was in California, I was remembering how popular they were among Bay Area radicals. I heard them all the time. And the same thing when you contextualize the Tesla violence, or you take a poll with Rutgers and the assassination of Trump doesn't offend much, half the people on the left, or there were things that were said about the two assassination Trumps on social media that should never have been uttered. You've lowered the bar, and when you have Tim Waltz, calling when they're using this foul language about Musk or Trump, or they're celebrating the decline of Tesla stock, then it's not very far to go reify that with violence, and that's what's happened. And I think they're playing with fire. I really do.
Well, 10-7 is really a marker for me. That
Yeah.
was a dividing, as Douglas Murray wrote in his book, which is behind me. Every now and then a flare goes up and you see exactly where everyone stands. I think that was a flare, and I think we do know where everyone stands after that. Did it illumine much for you?
Yeah, it did. It was it was not an aberration. If you listen to that Taylor Lorenz interview, that was kind of channeling the ideology of the left's reaction to October 7th. Well, it might have been bad, but you got to look at the whole picture, and that's what they do. But they always condone acts of violence for the greater cause. It seems to me, at least, they do. Nobody really came out on the left wing base and said this is terrible, this is horrible. And I was at Stanford University when there were people openly celebrating it on campus. You could see them; they were delighted. And I don't remember, they were violating all sorts of campus statutes. They were camping instead of 24 hours, 4 months later. They trashed the president's. There was nobody coming out and say, "This is a pathology that you people have no moral compass." They were afraid to say that.
Well, we do have a lot of pathologies abroad. Yesterday, the New York Times broke a story allegedly detailing the disagreements in President Trump's team about whether or not Israel ought to strike Iran. I'm very, very suspicious of such stories because the Times has been wrong on Russia, 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 and many other things over many years. They were wrong about Iran's nuclear program when they got fed a bad intel report towards the end of the Bush administration. But assume for a moment that it's true. What cautions and considerations would you advise the president to take into account before he strikes or doesn't strike Iran?
Well, these are tactical decisions. Strategically, he's during the campaign and in his first 90 days, he's been unequivocal that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. And I think, as he did after the reaction with Iran when it attacked some of our facilities, and he canceled a strike. He did kill Soleimani, but he does not like optional military engagements in the Middle East. They interfere with his economic policy, his MAGA agenda. That being said, he's unequivocal. So it's a question of he's going to give them one last chance. Most people, including myself, don't think they're going. I mean, they're stalling, and he will have to act. But this process of going through it, it may irritate the Israelis for a while, but eventually I think he'll gain independence and middle of the road and say, well, he tried to negotiate with him. He gave him a last chance. And he hopes, I think, by putting the B-2s and Diego Garcia and building up and the tankers to maximize the pressure, and they've got problems with their energy, their budget, the embargo, and he thinks maybe if I let them talk for a while, the domestic opposition, who knows, we might have another green revolution. But I don't think it's going to work, but I can see his logic.
I think he's doing the same thing, by the way, with Putin. And I had this argument
Yeah.
with a law faculty member yesterday. He had to beat up Zelensky a little bit to make sure that Zelensky was not identified as the obstacle to peace. It's clearly Putin now. And I actually think
Yes.
it was diplomatically masterful to isolate Putin as the guy who was deciding not to make peace.
Yeah, and both in the past and the present. I mean, if he's serious that he's thinking of having a secondary embargo on anybody who buys Russian oil, that's much more injurious to Russia than anything the Biden administration or the Obama administration ever thought of. And when you look at his history, he sold offensive weapons in the way that Biden or Obama wouldn't. He got out of the missile deal. He killed the Wagner group in Syria. He upped the sanctions. He warned the Germans not to do Nord Stream 2. He has a long record of being much tougher on Putin than either Democratic administration before. And Putin didn't go anywhere for the only time in 4 administrations during his tenure. But he does this art of the deal where he, when I wrote about him, I read all of those books, and it's the same menu. You cut a deal, and then you try to get 50. You say you want 80%. You're happy with 55. You leave the room and praise everybody and say you got taken or that your opponent was brilliant, but you don't trash your opponent either during or after the negotiations. And that's what he does.
And he's doing it again. Looking back at the almost finish of the first 100 days. Victor, Congress has quietly and effectively gotten the budget passed. I'm hopeful that reconciliation with all of its major changes will be. The big collision thus far among the branches is between Article 2 and Article 3. And the Supreme Court has handed a couple of wins to the president. They didn't tell him to bring back the Venezuelans. They said, going forward, everyone needs a notice that they're subject to deportation and a hearing. But I do foresee a clash where the Supreme Court's going to have to choose, either to retreat or to try and go forward. We've only had this happen once before with Taney and Lincoln. What do you think is going to unfold here?
Well, I think they're going to be reluctant, but eventually they're going to act, because if they don't, of the 750 district judges, maybe 400 are left-wing, and they're being cherry-picked. Essentially, some of these judges are adjudicating foreign policy. They're executives, and that was never intended by the founders. So if they don't intervene and say a local district judge cannot, by fiat, basically establish the foreign policy of the United States without an elected executive's ability to do so, it's not sustainable. You'll just have a judicial tyranny, and it will spread because the Republicans will say, just like lawfare, they don't get it, and we're going to cherry pick conservative judges, and we're going to try to shut them down when we're out of power and they have the presidency.
Now, I think among the 6 originalist conservatives on the court, 2 of them are best described as institutionalist conservatives, the Chief Justice and I think Amy Coney Barrett. The institutionalists sometimes go slow, but they also don't endanger the entire court system. District court judges making radical rulings that have to be reversed endanger the entire court system. They destroy the rule of law. And you know the Roman Revolution better than anyone. When the rule of law begins to break down, it's hard to stop it from doing so. And I don't know that these district judges are even aware of the dance they're involved in.
I don't think they understand. I think that's a very good point. I don't think they understand that their authority depends a lot on the prestige they've established over generations, that people respect federal judges. But if they start freelancing and sort of hogging the media limelight, and that you almost get the idea that some of these judges are narcissistic and they feel that they're president or something, they're going to destroy the integrity, but also the reputation. People are not going to have confidence in the federal judiciary, and I think that's already happening. And that we saw that with lawfare, with Willis and Smith and James, etc. And they really destroyed the integrity of, I think, the federal courts somewhat with Jack Smith, but also these local people. And I think that the left understands that if the Republicans were to do that, and people are, I don't think they should, but if they do that, we're going to be in Roman Republic times, as you said. It's going to be a downward spiral of tit for tat until you get lawlessness and chaos. But you know what? Just a final comment. A lot of conservatives will say, well, they don't get it, Victor. You can't deter them. The only thing they understand is reciprocity. You can play by the Marquess of Queensberry rules, but that just empowers them. So I understand that argument too.
But I like the way Trump has said to Laura Ingraham, he's never disobeyed a court ruling. And he hasn't thus far. I wonder if a radical, who will pull back the radical? If a radical finds him in criminal contempt, as Judge Boasberg threatened, or the senior district court judge in Washington State who said birthright citizenship, it's nonsense, it's obviously unconstitutional. In fact, it's a case of first impression. It's never been adjudicated. People have strong opinions. I think birthright citizenship is here to stay, but it's not obviously unconstitutional. It's never been adjudicated. I think the Supreme Court has got to step in, that it's their responsibility, not the president's, to avoid the conflict here. Do you agree
Yeah,
with me that
I do, especially as you say that he's said that he would abide by, he's not going to define the Supreme Court. He's not at all. And he's always said he will follow court rulings. And he's not defying a district judge even now, even as outrageous as it is. He played along. I mean, all of those lawfare things were so outrageous, yet he dutifully showed up in court. He went through the appeals process. He never said, come and arrest me. He never did that. He followed every one of those bogus indictments. And I think that's why he won the election. People said he is a victim of a miscarriage of justice. He played by the rules. They misused them. And I think this is going to backfire just as lawfare did during the campaign and earlier.
So my last question: for 100 years, progressivism has been in the saddle, and the administrative state has grown and grown and grown since Wilson. Donald Trump's had 100 days. He's made it clear he's going to take on the administrative state and try and break it in a number of different ways, including by asserting the authority to replace independent agency heads and a bunch of other things, cut off spending. Do you think he'll win in that confrontation? He's up against 100 years of left.
I asked myself because Republicanism was Bushism, McCainism. I liked all those guys, Romneyism, and their idea was basically musical chairs. On my watch, I'm not going to really address the debt, the trade deficit, the budget deficits, and the cultural takeover of the institutions by the left. And maybe the music won't stop while I'm president, and then the next guy can deal with it. But Trump was almost eager to be a counter-revolutionary. He was kind of like, these people were Jacobins. They're going to destroy the country. It's gone too far. I'm going to address the DOJ, the government, size of government, every type of debt and deficit, the universities, the immigration, everything, and all at once. And he doesn't have a large legislative majority, and I'm not sure that in all these questions he'll have the Supreme Court on his side. But so it's pretty revolutionary what he's trying. This is a very exciting time to be alive, watching this counter-revolution.
I agree with it. I think it is absolutely without precedent. There's only one figure remotely like him so far outside of the system, and it's Nixon when he came back. And they share a lot in common. You never knew what Nixon was going to do. Yeah. You never know what Trump's going to do.
Never did. I think he's a little bit like Andrew Jackson, too.
Oh, yes.
The Jacksonian revolution against the Federalists and the northeastern bloc on government, and here Jackson kind of blew all that up in a populist.
The first populist. That's why his picture is there. Victor Davis Hanson, good luck at the commencement at Hillsdale next month. I understand it's you and everyone on campus is looking forward to it. Thank you for joining me. We'll continue to check in. Victor's podcast is at the Salem Podcast Network. You should be subscribed. You should be watching it on YouTube, and you should be opining and liking it. Thank you, Victor. I hope you have a great Holy Thursday planned. Some breaking news from the Supreme Court. Supreme Court today announced it will hear oral arguments next month over the legality of President Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship. Now, I was just talking about this with Victor Davis Hanson. The courts are going to umpire a lot of these disputes. I am among the vast majority of legal professors, law professors, who believe that birthright citizenship, the plain meaning of the 14th Amendment is if you're born here, you're a citizen here, and that the phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof is meant to exclude the children of diplomats and not people who have entered the country illegally that their children are not. But it has not been decided. It's never been decided. There's a case that's close, but not on the four squares. It's not four cornered. It's just a case of first impression. So when the Wall Street Journal writes, most legal scholars say the amendment's meaning is clear. People born in the U.S. are citizens regardless of the citizenship of their parents. They're both right and wrong. Most legal scholars say that. That's not what I said. I said I think they will decide it, but it's not clear. It's never been decided. So anyone who says it's clear is fake news. It will be an interesting argument. I think John Sauer, the new Solicitor General, has a big task on his hands to try and persuade a majority of the court that the 14th Amendment doesn't say what it says. and that the subject to the jurisdiction thereof was intended in its original public meaning, not the intent of its sponsor, but as it was understood at the time. Now, after the 14th Amendment was passed in 1868, ratified in 1868, we entered into a period of immigration in the United States that was, until the last 4 years, unmatched. I believe it was 40 million people between 1880 and 1920 immigrated from abroad in the United States. And some of them didn't come in legally through Ellis Island. Many of them did. Many of them arrived all sorts of ways, right? On freighters, on foot, from Canada. They got to Canada and they walked across the border. Lots of them ended up all over the United States. They had kids, and those kids, the history and tradition is that we've never, ever treated anyone born of parents who did not enter the country legally as other than a citizen. Now, that's not been decided. That's why the court's going to have an oral argument. I think it's on May 15th. Am I reading that right? And the great news is that the court moved quickly, because we got random judges firing off ridiculous, like Judge up in Washington, the old guy, Judge Kugenauer. I don't. He was appointed by Reagan. He said this is wildly unconstitutional. No, it's not. It's a case of first impression. Some judicial modesty, please. It'll be an interesting argument, and I appreciate that the Supreme Court is moving quickly on it. And for this weekend report, because Ben Domenech is here. He usually does the weekend review with me on Friday, but it's Good Friday tomorrow, so we're doing it today. Ben Domenech is the senior editor at the American Spectator. He's a Fox News contributor, and he's here with me once a week. Ben, let's start with the most recent and terrible headlines. Florida State shooting. I don't know the details yet. Early reports are always wrong. Attempted assassination of Pennsylvania Governor Shapiro. And Taylor Lorenz talking nut talk about the assassin. What is going on? Are we in 1968 again?
Well, I sure hope not, Hugh. I mean, as you know, the statistics from an era that saw the level of violence and bombings that period had. I mean, we do not want to live through something like that again. But I have to say, the rhetoric that is coming, especially from the radical left, is absolutely abhorrent on some of these things. And one thing that I think we should keep in mind is that people like Taylor Lorenz, they're not dumb. They know exactly what they're doing. It's crazy, but they're not. They are appealing to that appetite. I mean, it was not lost on me that one of the things that she made sure to mention in that just absolutely abhorrent interview that she did with CNN was the fact that her levels of engagement increased dramatically when she was saying the things that she was saying about Luigi. And keep in mind, she's also someone who has repeatedly called Joe Biden a war criminal, who talked about being disappointed when she believed a false rumor that he had passed away. I mean, the point is that this is coming from the radical left, and it's coming in a consistent manner. And that's something that I think the media doesn't really want to talk about, because they want to play both sides of them with this stuff. But that's where it's coming from, and we know it. And we know it that it's also directed, obviously, now at Democrats like Josh Shapiro. And obviously, it's motivated, or at least it seems to have been motivated, by the feelings of the arsonist about Palestine and things related to that. There is a level of radicalism and danger going on there that I believe that we need to fully recognize and respect, because one of the things that's happened over the past several years is we've had to listen to this absolute BS from the Biden administration, in particular, about the nature of domestic threats coming from the likes of people praying outside of abortion clinics and homeschoolers and Catholics and Christians who just happen to be serious about their faith and belief. And that is something that they got away with for far too long. I think we're going to learn even more about the kind of things that they did in the coming months and years. But we cannot allow them to both sides this thing. They have a serious problem, and it's one that they need to focus on. And I just do not see that happening yet. Instead, I think they're treating it like it's all a big joke, which is what Taylor Lorenz is doing, and she's doing it on purpose.
Engagement farming, I would hope. CNN has an actual office of quality control, and I did debates with them in 2015 and 16. Someone was always in the room from quality control just to speak up on behalf of ethics. if anyone thought it was close. Apparently, they've left the building because I would never invite Taylor Lorenz back on a program after that, glorifying an assassin.
And just for your listeners' benefit, I mean, I'm sure you probably have played the audio, but it's one of these things where she has gotten away with this for a long time by saying it online and then accusing people of misinterpreting what she's said. But then when she gets into an interview and she just says it, it makes it harder to spin. So on a certain level, I'm actually glad that they did that and glad that they aired it, because I think it's going to be something that follows her for a long time and that she's going to have to answer for the next time that something horrible like this happens. And we know it's going to happen at some point. It just inevitably will. And Hugh, I'm absolutely over it, and I'm particularly over it because we now see politicians of all these different stripes who have the boldness and the willingness to stand up. We've seen the threats that were lodged against Nancy Mason, against Tulsi Gabbard. We've seen the threats that have been leveled at obviously J.D. Vance and Donald Trump get threats all the time. And, of course, we've seen attempted assassinations, going back to Steve Scalise, which is a stone's throw from where I live. And that, to me, is something that should have changed the way that we view the importance of protecting our political leaders, and particularly justices of the Supreme Court. And that's something that I still think hasn't gotten quite through yet.
Maybe we are in 1968, but we're accustomed to it. You can't remember it. I do. Things would blow up, and you'd wake up in the morning, Bobby Kennedy was dead, and maybe we are in that, and we'll look back on it. Let me move to the next. We got three this afternoon. Hamas rejects hostage deal proposal, dismisses Netanyahu's, quote, partial deals. The word is out in Israel. They were giving Hamas one last chance. They positioned everyone. They're going to go full scale now. Ben, do they have any choice?
I don't think they have a choice, and I think that this was inevitable. I mean, the Hamas is. I mean, look, they're desperate in this. The Wall Street Journal story about their inability to pay their fighters cash anymore. Yeah. The frustrations that have happened, I think, on the side of the Israelis is that they feel like this was always going to be the end point. But they have to move, and that's unavoidable. And it's you would have liked to avoid it, but this was always going to turn into a desperate circumstance, I think. And I think looking back on it,
yeah, they're going full Alamo without the nobility. Let me ask you now about the New York Times story purporting to leak the substance of an internal disagreement within the Trump National Security Team over whether or not Israel and the United States ought to strike Iran's nuclear weapon system. Look, I'm so not persuaded by anything the New York Times puts out there, but it also could be a giant head fake by Team Trump. I don't know what to think. What do you think?
I don't know either. But one thing I would say to people is people need to keep in mind that the New York Times does not have the kind of sourcing in this administration that it did, I think, in the first Trump administration. I would give some pause to it. You don't have quite the level of internal, I think, leaking that is intentional going on in part because of these feuding factions having become, I think, a bit different in terms of their personalities and in terms of the kind of jobs that they want after they leave the administration. But that's a larger story. But one thing I do think is true is, of course, the president has surrounded himself with competing visions when it comes to foreign policy. I think he's listening to all of them and weighing what he wants to do, as he does in so many other areas. And so I don't think we should be surprised by that. He's going to listen to these different things, but ultimately he's going to give the go-ahead to what he thinks is right and what he thinks is going to work. And I think he's a prudential guy, and I think he takes his time to make these decisions. But once he makes them, and they're done.
All right, we will watch it unfold. I'm done with predicting what's going to happen, but I do report what's happened. What happened today at the Supreme Court? They granted cert, and we'll hear arguments in May on birthright citizenship. Now, I'm of the opinion that it's clear, and that people born in the United States are citizens. But I'm also of the opinion that it's never, I know as a matter of fact, it's never been decided. It's a case of first impression. So people say that it's over. They wouldn't have granted cert. They would have summary judgment it, shadow docketed it 9-0 if the question hadn't been answered before. And it has been never answered before. Ben, are you surprised the court moved this quickly? They're going to argue it on May 15th.
I'm not surprised, because I think that this was an issue that the court, came in knowing was going to inevitably be raised, given the promises that the president had made when he was a candidate about birthright citizenship. The fact that they've dipped their toe into this area before, and that there are strong opinions held by many of the people who support him that this is an issue that needs to be resolved. And then, of course, some of them are strongly of the opinions that they can remove it. I am not of that opinion, but I do think that the Supreme Court needs to weigh in on this matter, because we've had all these arguments going on for far too long, as you know, that are basically all prefaced on the idea that, we don't know. We don't have a clear ruling from the court about what their view is on this, and I think that that's something that we need as a country, and is going to, frankly, I think, go in a way that may disappoint some people on the right, but is also going to be hopefully a clarifying event, given the fact that they granted cert so quickly, and that they did make the decision to combine these cases in such a way. I'm looking forward, frankly, to hearing the arguments. I mean,
that's going to be, and John Sauer is the Solicitor General. He's charged with defending the executive order. I don't know how he does it unless he tries to go into the original intent of the 14th Amendment's framers. And I'm not persuaded by it. I've heard it for years.
I'm not. Yes, I agree, and I think that that's going to have to be where he goes. And look, there are going to be people who come away from this, still holding to their view. But I believe that it's very important to have clarity on this issue, because it also determines there's a domino effect that it will do, I think, in affecting immigration policy generally in the United States, and frankly, dealing with a lot of stateless children who would emerge in this circumstance. That we have to find, a situation. How do we deal with them? Where do they go? Who do they live under? I believe that if you are born in the United States, that you owe the flag your allegiance, and that we owe you the citizenship that should be granted by birthright. But I also believe that that's something that needs to be adjudicated in the Supreme Court in order for us to be able
and said clearly. And finally, I'm going to come back with Ben, keep talking about the courts, and then when we come back, Harvard in the first 100 days. Now, Ben, I follow the courts for a living and teach the courts, and I've told my students all semester, I've never seen this many lawsuits at once, but I'm glad to see the Supreme Court leaning forward as they did in Trump versus JGG. I'm glad to see them lean forward into the birthright citizenship. I think they're going to have to yank Judge Boasberg's chain again, because he's threatened to hold Donald Trump in criminal contempt. I really don't want that collision between Article 2 and Article 3, and I think it's up to the Supreme Court to make sure it doesn't happen. What do you think?
I think, look, this is one of those institutional moments where you've got a lot of people in robes who are arguing with each other, and some of those arguments happen in public, but some of them also happen behind the scenes, and I think that there absolutely needs to be some jerking of the chain here. Look, I have been paying attention, obviously, to this situation with the El Salvador deportation. One thing that I think is getting missed in all of this is that while there is a legal argument happening and that there are all these politicians in D.C. who are taking stances, it is one of the rare instances in politics where both sides think that the argument is to their advantage. Republicans are, they're happily going down and visiting El Salvador and saying, look at all these criminals that are being locked up, and this is a good thing. And then you have Democrats who are, posing for the cameras and going down and doing visits where they don't visit really anybody, and they don't come away with anything, but they're planning even more of them. Frankly, to see that play out in real time, I think Democrats have not learned from the 2024 election, Hugh. They've taken a story with a pretty bad fact pattern and a pretty bad individual, regardless of what you think of whether he's in MS-13 or not, or whether you think the government has proved that. And they've decided to make this something that is a huge priority for them and what they want to lean into at the moment. It wasn't the lesson of 2024 that they were punished for their open border policies and coming across as too soft on crime in big cities, and particularly involving migrants? I mean, is this the smart path for Democrats to go back? And then, of course, you have, the prediction from Nate Silver that AOC is the current leader in the clubhouse for the 2028 nomination for the Democrats. I don't know, obviously, whether that's going to be true or not. I think it's way too early. But are they taking away the lesson that they just need to lean harder?
Well, she did. I didn't see Nate Silver's prediction. She did raise $9 million in the first quarter, probably the greatest haul by an individual congressperson not in leadership in history. And I do think there isn't any downside for her to go left, left, left. There's a lot of downside for the Democrats to do the McGovern thing, but there's no downside for her.
Yeah, and I think that that's going to be something that we have to consider at this point. Maybe this is a moment where leaning into the left, leaning into even more into these hard issues for them, including the trans issue, you've got the issues with Maine right now, and you've had, potentially Minnesota next in terms of, boys and men and girls sports and that kind of thing. I think that there is a faction that is going to lean even harder into that, and that the centrists who still remain within the Democratic Party, and there are some, I think that they're at a disadvantage.
They're going to be driven out. Ben, I've spent a lot of time in the last 2 days talking about my alma mater. They got a letter on April 11th from the Department of Education and others saying you got to reform your governance and leadership, your merit-based hiring, your merit-based admission, your international admissions, your viewpoint diversity and admissions and hiring. You got to reform programs with egregious records of anti-Semitism, discontinue DEI, reform your student discipline, provide whistleblowers with protection and for transparency. This is in the aftermath of the Supreme Court finding that they had engaged in prohibited racial discrimination in admissions and the anti-Semitism we all saw. And Harvard takes 72 hours and blows them off. I mean, in a 3-page letter, they say, no, we're not going to do any of that. Go away. Trump says, okay, IRS, I'm applying to have their tax-exempt status revoked. That's Bob Jones, 1983. Same thing happened. Bob Jones had violated the Civil Rights Act. It's not unprecedented. John Avalon, I hope he's not your friend, made a complete fool out of himself by making fun of Bob Jones University on CNN instead of saying, well, there's this case precedent here that if you disobey the Civil Rights Act, you can lose your tax-exempt status. What do you make of this whole thing?
John is an ex-friend, so
okay.
But I will emphasis on the first part of that. The thing that I think about this is we have had problems with these institutions for so long, and part of it is because they believe they have carte blanche to do whatever the heck they want. And I think that the Trump administration is right to go after this. I also think that this is a change in posture that is not entirely, but is in part due to the efforts of Chris Rufo and some of his colleagues and allies, which I am so impressed by, because I think this was a situation where the established right had really kind of run into the ground. They had not been able to move anything as it related to reforming higher ed and aggressively going after the actual place of pain, which is, of course, the funding and the fact that they have, they enjoy this enormously generous nonprofit status, and that is something that I think the Trump administration was always going to target at some point. And it turns out that Harvard basically invited them to do it by blowing them off and not even responding. I think that they could have played a smarter game here in terms of trying to meet them halfway or trying to negotiate some of these things. Instead, they blow them off, and now you're going to see, I think, wheels in motion that are really going to create problems for higher ed. You're going to hear a lot of screaming about it from people who also are, enjoy the great honor, frankly, of graduating from Harvard. But it's one of these things that I think was inevitably going to come under this administration that is being so much more aggressive.
Ben, if you're my age, you remember that Bill Bennett and Terry Eastland wrote a book in the 70s called Counting by Race. Remember Ward Chamberlain won a proposition in California outlawing the use of race. You remember that the Supreme Court has handed down decision after decision narrowing when you can use race. And you know that anti-Semitism has never been acceptable. To a certain extent, the old right's exhausted. It takes a Trump with his energy to go after these institutions and say, okay, I will up the ante on you. We'll pull your tax-exempt status. That's like the NCAA death penalty in the old days.
It is. And I think it needed to happen because they simply have not gotten the message, despite all of the different decisions, propositions, wins that have happened consistently, really. And thanks to the hard work, I'm glad you brought up Ward Connerly. It's one of these things that, like, this is
Ward Chamberlain's the wrong guy. Ward Chamberlain's the left-wing nutter from Boulder. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. But I didn't mean to, but yes. The simple fact is that it was due to fights like that often seemed like losing causes at the beginning, but then won, that we are now in this position. And I think that frankly, higher ed doesn't have a leg to stand on. And look, I I really wish that these institutions were actually great again. I really wish that we could bring them back to being the kind of things that every American can look up to and want to send their kids to, but they aren't, and they aren't going to be until they have a fundamental change in their approach, and I think it's going to take this kind of chemotherapy to make them make that change.
All right, last topic. The 100 days is April 30th. I've already written that it's a fake number, that there are 1,341 days left in Trump's second term. So it's really kind of silly. That being said, everyone's going to engage in it, so I did. What do you think of it? Is this fundamental things are afoot time?
This has been the most accelerationist 100 days that I have experienced
Good word.
in my lifetime.
Good word.
They have leaned into things to a much greater degree than I expected, than I think a lot of Americans expected, and I believe that it's informed by the president's own experience, and also personally, Hugh, I think that he is informed by his experience on the campaign trail and surviving that assassination attempt. To circle back to your earlier topic, I think the fact that he survived that, when you survive a near-death experience, it has a way of making you frame your priorities differently. And I think that has absolutely happened in his case, where he believes he needs to move much faster. I've seen it happen in other people's lives. When Chip Roy survived an early cancer diagnosis when he was younger, he was my friend at the time. He became similarly minded in terms of his dedication. We all know how fearsome he can be operating within the House. And I think that this has a way of changing your mindset about things. And personally, I believe that the president has had that change in mind, and it's why we've seen 100 days that has had so much going on to the point where it's made Washington heads spin all over the place.
And this is why I think the Ayatollah Khamenei had better take Trump seriously. And he can disarm. They can dismantle.
Yep.
But I think if they don't, Trump will do what he said. There will be bombing. I think that's the direct quote. And I don't think the Ayatollahs ought to treat him as Obama or Biden, because he's not, or even Trump won. He's not.
He's not. His mindset has changed on a lot of things, and I think that he believes that he needs to be even tougher when it comes to a lot of different aspects of both his administration and the world. And while that does lead occasionally to chaotic situations where people aren't sure what's going to happen, and a lot of things are moving so fast that they can't keep track of them, I think it also leads to a level of seriousness about, we have so many things that we need to get done that we have to be operating on a compressed schedule. We have to be treating this as if we're playing next Sunday. We can't wait around and come up with a game plan.
Ben Domenech, have a very happy Easter in your household. Thank you. I will talk to you next Friday at the regularly appointed time. Hope you find all the Easter eggs, Ben. At least I hope you put them where they can be found. That's the most important thing for a dad.
Yes, you can't forget them.
You can't lose them under the rug. That's right. Thank you, Ben. Follow Ben at B. Domenech. Follow his podcast over at Fox News Podcast. Let me do the market report brought to you by American Federal, our friends in the gold business. Dow is closed down 1.33%. S&P went up 0.13%. NASDAQ went down 0.13%. And gold went down a little bit to $3,335.70 an ounce. If you want to buy or sell gold, do it with American Federal. You can call American Federal today. They're working. 800-221-7694. 800-221-7694. Nick Rovich and his team are honest, transparent, straightforward, and not complicated. How much do you want to buy? When do you want to buy it? Do you want American Eagles, Krugerrands? You want a big gold bar because you got a lot of cash and you want to put a lot of money into gold because you've seen it go up? We don't make a prediction about price here, but I point out that gold has more than kept pace with inflation for the past 100 years, and certainly has in the last year. If you're going to buy or sell gold, do it with AmericanFederal.com, 800-221-7694, or AmericanFederal.com, 1-800-221-7694. I'm just trying to find reliable information about the shooting at Florida State University, and there are lots of different reports, and I don't pass any along until I know that it's absolutely right. So I'm aware of it. I see the pictures. I see the video. I know you do as well. First reports are always wrong, so I wait, and I encourage you to wait as well. I don't want you to wait on getting a home loan if you're about to move. Don't wait until a week before you're going to move. Call andrewandtodd.com today. 888-888-1172. They were Sierra Pacific Mortgage. I've known Andrew Del Rey for more than 20 years. Todd, half that time. They're fabulous professionals. They help you get into a home wherever you're going. Some of you have to move. Some of you just want to buy a house and you've decided, well, interest rates fell a little bit today, but I don't know if they're ever going to fall significantly enough for it to match the difference in the increase in home prices, which continues to be substantial everywhere except Austin, Texas. Well, for whatever reason, the housing market in Austin, Texas fell by 4% year over year. But most big cities in the country, it's going up. So the interest rates would have to drop a lot before you could make up the difference between what houses are appreciating at. So don't wait around. Get pre-qualified. Find out what your credit rating is. Find out how much you can afford to borrow, how much you need to put down. If a veteran's loan is available for you, if you're a veteran, 100% financing. FHA if you're a first-time buyer. Reverse mortgage it. If you're a senior citizen over the age of 62 and you're living in your own house, you don't want to make another payment. Curate the dollars that come out very carefully. AndrewandTodd.com or call them, 888-888-1172. They are a bank. Sierra Pacific Mortgage is a bank. They underwrite the loan. So you can get one-stop shopping. They make it as easy as possible. They've done it tens of thousands of times, so they know how to make it work. AndrewandTodd.com, great sponsor. Now, this is not a sponsored ad, but I'm about to tell you. I want to explain to you the Consumer Cellular switch. Consumer Cellular is a new sponsor, but I do not owe them this ad. I'm doing this ad because I want to make sure if you're 50 and older and you're listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show, I want you to really hone in on this. Do you know what you're paying for your cellular? If you don't know what you're paying for your cellular, you're in trouble. Big Wireless wants you to be in an unlimited data plan. And if you want an unlimited data plan, the best one's with Consumer Cellular because they have 2 lines for $60 a month, unlimited data. So whether you're 25 or 50 or 100, they don't care what age you are. But as you get older, you tend to use less data, and you might want a lower data plan. Consumer Cellular has that too. But if you want unlimited data for a while, see how it works, but you're paying more than $60 a month for 2 lines, then make the switch. You don't have to get a new number. You can keep your old number if you want, or you can get a new number. You can bring your old number with you if you want. You can bring your contacts, your emails. You don't have to worry about losing anything if you want. If you want to lose it all, which is what I wanted to do with my second phone, you can lose it all. But if you want to keep it all, you can, and you can keep your number, you can change. The key point is it's fabulous service. It's the equal of any service out there. So you'll get clear, crystal clear voice quality, and the unlimited data, 2 lines at $60 a month. That's the best deal going on out there. I wanted to emphasize to you, you don't have to be looking for a second phone. That's why I went and got it, because I needed one. And it's pretty common now, especially in the Beltway, but everywhere else, that some people have. It's not a burner phone. I'm not going to throw it away. It's the family phone. Only the family gets it. Everybody else, you can continue to use my old number, my old email, all that good stuff. But I went to Consumer Cellular because they're reliable and the service is just as great. You can call them at 1-800-411-4454. 1-800-411-4454. I always say it slowly so you can envision the number. 1-800-411-4454. How do I remember it? Well, 411 isn't 311, it's not 911, it's 411-4454. See how easy that is? 1-800-411-4454. Or go to consumercellular.com/Hugh. The great news, 20 minutes, it's done. And you'll call them, and you'll be talking to a live person in a half minute or less. They were at 19 seconds the day I talked. They track that. And their call centers here in the United States, and you'll be able to understand each other perfectly well. Call 800-411-4454. Tell them Hugh sent you and say, I want the best plan for my life. And here's the situation. They'll walk you through it. Don't go anywhere, America. Josh Kraushaar is the editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider. Josh, big news out of Israel this afternoon is that Hamas has rejected the attempt to reach another extension of the ceasefire. And I mean, they've rejected it. What do you expect to happen now?
The same as what's happened before. What's new, Hugh? Hamas has not been a real partner. Needless to say, it's a terrorist group. They're not gonna. I mean, look, there were. Essentially, their version of a compromise would be, Israel surrender, pulling out, and that's what they want. That's not going to happen. So, yeah, it's very tough for the hostage families. It's been a really rough slog for them since the end of that first phase of the last agreement. But this is one of the least surprising news stories today is Hamas not agreeing to a deal.
Okay, so what did you make of the New York Times story that Netanyahu wanted to strike Iran and there's division within Team Trump on whether or not to do so?
It's what we've been reporting on and hearing a lot about, which is that there's a divide within the administration between the Iran hawks, the people who favor a robust American assistance to Israel as it strategizes and thinks about taking on Iran's nuclear program militarily, versus a more restrained. They call themselves the restrainers, isolationist, whatever you want to describe them as. A faction. Tulsi Gabbard was mentioned prominently in the story as someone who's been counseling against American support for Israeli military action. J.D. Vance, the vice president, also mentioned in that story. That is a divide within the national security leadership of the White House, and it's one that's not going away anytime soon.
No quotes attributed to the vice president, right?
No quotes from anyone, right? I mean, it was based on sources, background sources of people familiar with the meeting. But look, I can tell you what we've been reporting at JI, which is that there's been a little bit of a knife fight behind the scenes between mid-level staffers that probably most of your audience haven't heard of, Hugh, but that have very, very different views on the role of America in the world, on the view of foreign policy, on Russia and Ukraine, on the Middle East. And a lot of these battles have been taking place behind the scenes, but on an issue like Iran, ultimately it was Trump who made the final decision. He decided to persuade Israel that the U.S. was not going to support an Israeli strike for the time being.
Now, 3 Department of Defense officials were escorted from the building this week. Do you think these two things, that story is connected to this story?
We don't know. There's been a lot of speculation about what these leaks. All these mid-level officials have close ties to the defense secretary, Pete Hegseth. All of these officials, one of them is sort of the leader, one of the leaders of sort of the isolationist view within the White House, Dan Caldwell. There are two other officials that were removed. We don't know what the leaks are about. The Fox News reported they were actually about Elon Musk's attempted participation in a wargaming exercise vis-a-vis China. But there is a lot of speculation out there that it had to do with the New York Times story. We don't know that, and we're still trying to report that out.
All right, last question, Harvard. I want them to get the book thrown at them because you get a letter from the government that says the Supreme Court said you've discriminated against Asian Americans in admissions for years. The anti-Semitism is in front of our faces. Everyone's seen the video, and Harvard blows them off. How do you react to that?
Well, look, Harvard has made so many mistakes. They could have dealt with the radicalism, the anti-Israel extremism on their campus on their own, and they let the problem fester. They lost their university president, ostensibly over plagiarism, but also because of her lack of leadership on the issue of anti-Semitism. That said, I think the administration may be biting off more than they can chew. There's the Wall Street Journal, which has been very sympathetic to the administration's policies against college campuses, that said there's good reason to oppose an unprecedented attempt of government to micromanage a private university.
But John, it's not unprecedented. Bob Jones University, 1983 Supreme Court case. They were in violation of the civil rights laws. They had their tax-exempt status pulled. It's not unprecedented. I can't help it if the Journal doesn't know that, but I didn't read their article, but it's not unprecedented.
Well, I think from the JI perspective, is this helping combat anti-Semitism? And it looked like Harvard was on the defensive, right? I mean, there were a lot of easy wins for the administration to go after, but they ended up kind of pursuing a grab bag of worthy issues: diversity of faculty, admissions policies. These are all issues that I think right-minded people can be sympathetic towards. But to use the heavy hand of government on issues unrelated to anti-Semitism allowed Harvard to really mount a fervent opposition, and it also rallied other Ivy League schools to join the opposition, like Columbia. So, I ultimately want a lot of be solved.
I'm going to disagree with you because I think when they particularly call out, I've got the letter in front of me, reforming programs with egregious records of anti-Semitism or other bias. It's one of 6 major points, and it's not just they're racist. They won't let Asian Americans in. They're racists.
But the Supreme Court ruled against them, and that should be worthy enough. I mean, that should be
dispositive.
Like, there's no need you can chew when you're already. I mean, there's only so much the government can do in micromanaging Harvard's affairs. I want them to deal with anti-Semitism. That's the issue at play here. And by taking on related and worthy issues, it allowed Harvard to politically fight back in a way that they probably otherwise wouldn't have been able to.
Interesting. I have a different point of view on this one, Josh. I think you go after the whole problem. Otherwise, all the problems will come back. But Josh Kraushaar, thank you for joining me. Hope your Passover was a good one. Follow him online at Josh Kraushaar. Thank you, Josh. Tomorrow's Good Friday, and Tarzana Joe does not rhyme on Good Friday, so he's here a day early on Holy Thursday. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Hugh. You may recall that last week after the Masters golf poem, you suggested I wear a costume suitable to the poetry. Well, I have written an Easter poem, but I am not dressed as the Easter Bunny.
That's
because this is not a secular Easter poem, if you would indulge me.
All right.
Reflecting on this moment's fears, my thoughts go back 2,000 years. I think of how it happened then. The judge of all was judged by men, beaten, spat upon, reviled. The Prince of Peace, the Holy Child, condemned because he spoke good news and charged as king of the Jews. Yet in his heart he held no wrath. He chose to walk another path. He gave his life so we might live, and asked the Father to forgive. Well, still injustice walks the land, on instability we stand. We can't perceive the pain he knew, but can act as he asked us to. No matter what the world has brought us, to love, just as the Savior taught us. That's the message of this day. Take up your cross and walk his way, to conquer all the hate and lies, and living his example, rise. That's Easter 2025 by Tarzana Joe.
Joe, you always come through at Easter. Well done. Rise. That will be at tarzanajoe.com tonight, I hope.
Indeed, it will be. Thank you.
And for all of you out there, if you don't know, Joe is our poet laureate, and he does amazing Easter poetry and music. He's done a song for us as well. But all of that collected at tarzanajoe.com. And if you need a poem post-Easter, let him have the weekend off. He's got Easter egg hunts and things like that. Right, Joe? You're going to be hunting for Easter egg?
And golf, perhaps. A little golf.
And golf. Yes. And golf. Easter egg Joe and all of his poems, Rise or Easter 2025, can be found at tarzanajoe.com. To get a poem from Joe, write to him at tarzanajoe@reagan.com. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter to you. When I come back, I will update you on the Florida State shootings. We have a couple more details. 2 dead, 6 total injured. I think it's total. The shooter is identified as a 20-year-old Phoenix Eichner, a Florida State University student, the son of a Leon County Sheriff's deputy. He used a weapon belonging to his mother. He was shot by first responders and taken to the hospital. And that much we know. That much I'll tell you. As other details come along, I will let you know. On this Holy Thursday, which has been marred by terrible violence in Tallahassee, Florida, where a shooter, aged 20 years old and a student at Florida State, brought at least 1, and some people say 2 weapons to campus, opened fire, killed 2, 6 are injured. It's unclear if one of those 6 include the shooter. The shooter is the son of a deputy sheriff who used a weapon belonging to his mother, the deputy sheriff. One FSU student who saw the shooter described him as, quote, a normal college dude who was wearing an orange T-shirt and khaki shorts. I was walking and this guy pulls up in an orange Hummer, the student said, and he gets out with a rifle and shoots in my direction. More details are arriving. Tragic situation. President Trump talked about it today, saying it's a terrible thing. There's not much anyone can say. I do want to move, though, to the other news, Supreme Court has accepted cert and has scheduled oral argument in the Birthright Citizenship case. So it's stepping up to dispose of a case of first impression. I believe they will rule. I'm not infallible. I'm often wrong on what the Supreme Court's going to do. I think the court will rule at least 7-2, maybe 8-1, maybe 9-0. That if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen, unless you happen to be born to an accredited diplomat over whom there is no jurisdiction, because we don't have jurisdiction over your mom and your dad. So I am very much of the opinion that I'm glad the case is taken. It's never been decided before. Everyone who says it's a lock really doesn't know anything about constitutional law, because it's not a lock. It just seems to me to be likely. And anyone who says it's wildly unconstitutional is wildly irresponsible, because it's never been decided. It's an open question, case of first impression. Let's go to Pam Bondi on Fox last night. Abrego Garcia came up again, cut number 9.
Yeah, Sean, factually, this is an extremely disturbing case. And as a career prosecutor, it is even more disturbing. Every American tonight should be thanking Donald Trump for making America safer by getting this guy out of our country. I'm going to call him a terrorist because he has been designated as a member of a terrorist organization. So this illegal alien terrorist came into our country illegally in March of 2012. We know that because he admitted that when he was stopped in 2019 by the anti-gang squad. They stopped him at a Home Depot with 3 other members. And here's what's very important. He was wearing a sweatshirt with gang insignia on it. The guy he was with, another MS-13 known member, had a tattoo with very similar insignia on it. ICE declared him as a member of MS-13. The police officers, the gang unit, declared him as a member of MS-13, and also they independently went to a reliable, confidential informant who said not only is he a member of MS-13, he gave them the clique, the Westerns, and he was called a Chicao, which is one of the higher-ranking MS-13 members. So they rightfully detained him, rightfully. An immigration judge agreed. An appellate immigration judge agreed. Now, here's where it gets even more frightening. In 2021, his girlfriend previously, his wife at the time, who he had married in jail after he'd gotten numerous tickets, didn't show up for court. He marries her in jail. She has a baby with him. And as a career domestic violence prosecutor, too, I know it takes a lot for any woman to come into court and say they're a victim of domestic violence. This woman came into court twice, getting a restraining order against him, saying it's horrific. He had beaten her. He had punched her in the eye. He had ripped her clothes off. What causes a young mother to do this? Her child was with her. She talked about her child in the petition for an injunction for safety. Ultimately, she didn't show up for court. That's your typical domestic violence victim. But this victim was even braver because she was married to one of the top MS-13 members who was illegally in our country and a terrorist. So now he gets...
Oh, go ahead.
Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry,
Sean.
Pam. Finish. No. You finish.
So, Sean, he, under Donald Trump's incredible plan to get these alien enemies, these terrorists out of our country, he is deported. He is deported back to where he came from, El Salvador. He is sitting in a prison, and every American should be thanking President Trump tonight, and every liberal journalist who has called him a Maryland man and saying he was rightfully in this country should be apologizing tonight to President Trump.
All right, so the one thing she did not mention is that an immigration judge had decided that he could not be deported to El Salvador because of a credible threat on his life, which may have been removed, but they still needed a process to declare that. So there was an error made in that. But what Pam Bondi is arguing, don't cry for me, Argentina. She's saying, look, be very, very clear about who we're talking. Don't make him into a hero. Don't make him into a victim. We may have made an administrative error on the processing of his deportation, but his deportation will stand. Now I want to go to President Trump welcoming Prime Minister Meloni to the White House today from Italy, cut number 1.
You have to understand we're getting right now 25% on cars, 25% on steel, 25% on aluminum. We're getting a 10% baseline. We took that down just because it was, the appropriate thing to do until we decide what the number will be. And we're, taking in a lot of money, which we've never done before, frankly. With Biden, we were losing a fortune on trade. But we're moving along very nicely, and we're going to end up with a baseline of a substantial number, which we never got anything. The United States never got anything until I came along, and then I put very substantial tariffs on China, if you remember. And we took in hundreds of billions of dollars.
Cut number 2.
As you know, we've had numerous talks, very, very at the highest level, frankly, with other countries. Yeah, we're doing very well, and we're moving along on trade very well. The United States was ripped off and taken advantage of by every country in the world, practically. I mean, I have to say practically, but just about everyone. That's not going to happen anymore, but we're going to make fair deals.
And then what about China? Cut number 3.
You have said in the past that you aren't worried about allies growing closer to China as a result of your tariffs. And this week we saw Chinese President Xi Jinping visit with 3 of our allies. Should you be worried that they're growing closer?
No.
Will you pick up the phone?
Nobody can compete with us. Nobody.
You said they have a good relationship with President Xi. Why not pick up the phone and call him and make a deal?
Oh, we're going to make a deal. We'll have a deal. I think we're going to make a very good deal with China.
Do you plan to reach out to him and call him?
I think that you will see we'll make a very good deal with China.
All right, let's now go to last night at the White House. Donald Trump hosted Franklin Graham for an Easter service. Cut number 7, this is Donald Trump. Cut number 6 first. Cut number 6.
3 days later, Christ's followers found the empty tomb. Jesus had defeated darkness and death and promised new life to all of humankind. And that's what we celebrate each year at Easter as we joyfully proclaim on Sunday, He is risen. The death and resurrection of Jesus are the essence of the Christian faith. Whether rich or poor, healthy or sick, young or old, or in times of peace or war, Christians everywhere find solace and hope in the knowledge that Christ died for them and that they could be united with Him in heaven. And that's what we want. That's what we all want. The miracles of Holy Week set in motion a transformation in human existence. Countless millions of Americans have been moved by Christ's example to heal the sick, defend their families, lift up their communities, and make our country stronger, better, and greater than ever before.
One more Donald Trump last night at the Easter service, cut number 7.
And as we gather with family and friends, we'll not forget the true source of our joy and our strength. America has put our trust in God. It will always be in God we trust. We will never change that. There's a movement to change it. It will not happen. We won't let that happen. Can you imagine a movement to change that? Robert, you're not happy about that when you hear that. Look at him. He's getting angrier and angrier. We can get angry too, can't we, huh? No, it's never going to change. And with God's help, we can overcome every challenge, triumph over every evil, and restore the spirit of faith in the United States for generations to come. We have a very simple slogan, make America great again, and that's exactly what we're doing.
All right, so he transitions from in God we trust to make America great again, and it works because he's Donald Trump and he's done it 100 times. I'll be right back. America's Seth Mandel joins me from Commentary Magazine to talk about what Hamas did not do, which was make a deal today, and what the New York Times said and didn't say, and whether or not we ought to believe them at all. Wall Street Journal this morning, Trump administration asks the Internal Revenue Service to start process to revoke Harvard's tax-exempt status. It's a long process, not easy to do, very infrequently used. And immediately, we know that he's right because Elizabeth Warren jumped on CNBC to stand with Harvard. So if she's in favor of whatever Harvard's doing, you can be safely on the other side of it. Cut number 11.
Before you go, how do you think the Harvard situation resolves itself, if at all?
Look, I'm looking for the off-ramp here. for the Trump administration. People are asking around the country, why are we better off to cut research on cancer, on Alzheimer's, on tuberculosis? You know, that's where this money goes. These are research grants, and these are research grants. They weren't given out politically. They were given out to people who are doing work that helps keep us all safer and healthier. We are not better and stronger because Donald Trump wakes up one day and decides he wants to cut that research. So I think I'm actually very proud of Harvard to stand up and say, we're not going to do that.
But here's the thing, then how should they be held accountable for failing to protect civil rights of Jewish students? And also, you know, this question about the tax-exempt status, which there are reports that he's trying to take away for political entity, there's ample evidence that a lot of the faculty that they employ are progressive and is increasingly political.
So if you believe that, go to court. Go to court. You start the process, and you know what? Instead of just mouthing off about what you think is happening, actually present some evidence. And let's look at the evidence. Let's let the other side come in and question that evidence. But you don't just get to lip off and say, and therefore the king gets to wave his magic wand and say, off with your head.
Doesn't the government determine where federal tax dollars go? And so they're allowed to decide.
Do you think they have a big bushel basket of money and they just say, you, good looking, you will have money. You, not so good looking, you're going to have to go hungry for a while. That's not how it works. Let's just do Con Law 101, and that is Congress writes those laws and allocates that money. The administration's job is to enforce those laws and spend that money the way the law tells them. And if they fail to do that, Part 3 is the courts are the ones who step in and enforce the law. That's the three parts.
Unless you defy or find probable cause.
You know, I am amazed at people who revel in not knowing what they're talking about. Donald Trump filed a request with the Treasury Department, IRS's acting chief legal counsel, Andil DeMello, to please revoke Harvard's tax-exempt status. It's an extraordinary step. Happened to Bob Jones University when they were involved in discrimination based on race, and Harvard has done that twice in the last 3 years, once against Asian Americans and, of course, systemically against Jews in the last year and a half. But it's pursuant to law that he's done that. He can't pull the tax-exempt status, although I think constitutionally, in Constitutional Law 101, I would say, well, you know, Article 2 is unified executive. If he directed them to do it, they would do it. But he's not doing it. He's going along with the law. And the tax code prohibits the president or others from requesting investigations of particular taxpayers, but it does not prevent them from requesting the termination of a nonprofit's tax-exempt status. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to happen. I hope it does. You got to get someone's attention over there. And that nonsense that Elizabeth Warren was going through about bushels of basket and cancer, it's all just nonsense. Harvard got $9 billion. They have already borrowed $750 million from the bond market to tidy over any short-term cash flow problems. The $9 billion is federal money. You know, I think we can find cancer research underway at other schools where they don't discriminate against Asian Americans and Jews. I just don't think it's that hard to find, and the innocent party here might be the research staff that's in fact Jewish, Asian American Jew. Could happen. Don't know. Could have happened. So it might be that the money was going to go to an Asian American Jew at Harvard, and they're not going to get the money. But you know what? The research that they're doing, you can do somewhere else. There's not the only, it is not, Harvard does not have a monopoly on Alzheimer's research and cancer research. So it's kind of a stupid argument. It's also a straw man. They're talking about the fact that Harvard has been found by the Supreme Court to have discriminated against Asian American applicants on the basis of their race, and they have admitted they have an anti-Semitism problem. Not one they're doing anything about, and when the federal government sends you a letter that, you know, if I'm the general counsel of a university who gets this letter, I do not do what Harvard did, which is blow it off. I don't write a high-handed, hubristic well, free American higher education, the belief, the proud tradition, everything right and glorious in America. No. I write back a letter and say, we've done this here. We've done that here. We haven't really thought this was a problem until you brought it to our attention. Is it appropriate to do? You respond in a lawyerly, deliberate fashion to a lawyer's letter, aware that the backdrop is you've been conclusively, dispositively determined to have engaged in racial discrimination, and the whole country knows you're anti-Semitic at the core. Everybody knows that. Everybody saw it. Can we play that tape again, Harley, just in case, if you're watching on the Salem News Channel, you can see the tape again from Harvard Yard, not long after 10/7. We've got a Jewish student surrounded, assaulted by pro-Palestinian, actually assaulted, touched. Assault is the imminent fear of an unwarranted, non-permitted touching. Battery is the actual touching. It's assault and battery. He's trying to get away. The Jew haters are trying to get him. One of the Jew haters has been elevated to profile status in the Harvard Law Journal. I've been told, I've heard, I haven't got it. I didn't go to Harvard Law, but I'll have to ask Tom Cotton about his alma mater next time he's on. So don't cry for me, Argentina. Elizabeth Warren, maybe, just have a clue what you're going to do before you say it. A little bit more of Donald Trump last night at the Easter service, cut number 5.
Nearly 2,000 years ago, during the sacred week, the living Son of God entered Jerusalem in triumph. Soon after, the Savior of mankind, who brought truth and light into the world, was betrayed, arrested, and tried, beaten, and nailed to a cross and crucified. For our sake, he gave up his life, and as the very great Reverend Billy Graham once said, God proved his love on the cross. When Christ hung and bled and died, it was God saying to the world, I love you. Those are beautiful words from a great man, Franklin, right? A great man, Franklin's incredible father.
Because Franklin Graham was there. Franklin Graham prayed. I may be able to play that after the break. Don't go anywhere, America. Lots more ahead, including Jim Talent. We'll talk about that story in the New York Times, and I'll continue to update any additional news from the Florida State campus where 2 were killed, 6 injured by a 20-year-old student enrolled at FSU, about whom we only know that his mother was a deputy sheriff and he used one of their private weapons. It wasn't his weapon, it was one of hers. That's basically Pam Bondi on the deportation of Abrego Garcia. He's not backing down, but I don't know where this goes. And it's one person, it's not that important to me. This is important to me. The Financial Times, Dimitri Sevastopoulos, really one of the better national security reporters in the United States, and he works for the Financial Times, which I think is the best newspaper in the world. A Chinese satellite company linked to the country's military is supplying Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen with imagery to target U.S. warships and international vessels in the Red Sea, according to American officials. The Trump administration has repeatedly warned Beijing that Changguang Satellite Technology Company Limited, a commercial group with ties to the People's Liberation Army, is providing the Houthis with intelligence, according to U.S. officials. Quote, the United States has raised our concerns privately numerous times to the Chinese government on Changguang Satellite Technology Company Limited's role in supporting the Houthis in order to get Beijing to take action, said a senior State Department official. The official added that China had ignored the concerns. Also told the Financial Times that the company's actions and Beijing's tacit support, despite Washington's warnings, is yet another example of China's empty claims to support peace. Quote, we urge our partner to judge the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese company on their actions, not on their empty words. Oh boy, what a day. Supreme Court accepts cert on birthright citizenship of a big shooting at Florida State. Hamas rejects the offer of a negotiated settlement in Gaza. So I imagine that Smotrich, one of the 2 most conservative members of the Israeli cabinet, said, open the gates of hell. And the IDF is positioning to do that. We'll see what happens overnight. Meanwhile, Franklin Graham last night with the opening prayer at the White House Easter service, cut number 4.
There's been a spiritual drought in this city the last few years and in this house. And so I'm very grateful for the Easter declaration that you put out. Thank you. Let us pray. Our Father and our God, we come tonight to say thank you. Thank you for sending your Son, Jesus Christ, to this earth to take our sins. That he died on the cross, shedding his own blood for each and every one. Buried in a tomb of sin. But on the third day, you raised him to life. And Father, we know that if we confess our sins and repent and believe on the name of your Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, we shall be saved. And Father, it's my prayer tonight that many people this Easter would turn from their sins and by faith believe on the name of your Son. And it's his name that we pray. Amen.
Now, I taught the Establishment Clause cases this week, and I told the students 5 or 6 years ago, I taught an entire seminar on the Establishment Clause and the free exercise, entire semester. Now it's 3 days because the Establishment Clause has been ironed out. The Lemon test has been tossed out, abandoned. Coach Kennedy versus Bremerton School District. Coach kneeling at midfield after the game. The school officials fired him because even though it was personal time, all employees could do what they wanted to do. He chose to kneel at the 50 or midfield, say a silent prayer. School district fired him. And after it went up to the Supreme Court and back down to the district court and back up to the Supreme Court, the discovery process had narrowed it to this fact. They fired him simply because they were afraid they were offending the Establishment Clause. And Justice Gorsuch, very eloquent opinion, said, no, that's not what it's about. We're not doing the Lemon test anymore. We're not doing the endorsement test anymore. We're looking at history and tradition, and we've never interfered for, but in fact have had tolerance for, individuals like Franklin Graham at places like the White House, and obviously a private expression of his own personal belief. Doesn't make America a Christian nation. It's not a declaration of that. Although Donald Trump said, in God we trust, and in God we trust is on our currency, and that's not a violation of the Establishment Clause either. I just want you to know the wonderful clarity that has arrived in the last half dozen years about the Establishment Clause makes me happy when I see something like that. Jim Talent was the senator from Missouri. He's now part of the leadership initiative at the Reagan Institute. He joins me. Hello, Jim. How are you? Happy Easter in advance.
And the same to you, Mr. Hewitt.
Well, I want to begin with the Iran story in the New York Times. You know the details. I've told my audience about it, but the president got a question about it not long ago in the Oval. Let's play that audio for you and have you react. Here's the president with Prime Minister Maloney in the Oval.
And they said the attack is what?
That you waved off an Israeli plan to attack Iranian nuclear facilities.
I wouldn't say waved off. I'm not in a rush to do it because I think that Iran has a chance to have a great country and to live happily without death. And I'd like to see that. That's my first option. If there's a second option, I think it would be very bad for Iran. And I think Iran is wanting to talk. I hope they're wanting to talk. It's going to be very good for them if they do. And I'd like to see Iran thrive in the future, do fantastically well. I know the Iranian people, they're incredible people. Always have been very smart, very energetic, very successful people. And I don't want to do anything that's going to hurt anybody. I really don't. But Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. It's, pretty simple. It's really simple. We're not looking to take their industry. We're not looking to take their land. All we're saying is you can't have a nuclear weapon.
All right, Jim Talent, what's that tell you about the New York Times story?
Well, it to the extent the story has said that Trump is backing away from his position, I just think I don't know how an administration could signal by its actions as well as its words that it is prepared to attack Iran and join the Israelis in attacking Iran if they don't break down their nuclear infrastructure. You look at the actions he's taken, that restored maximum pressure, brought the B-2s, which you tweeted about, into Diego Garcia, restored the flow of military equipment to Israel. He's located 2 THAAD batteries in Israel. They're attacking the Houthis, taking out their last standing proxy. It's one action after another action after another action to say to them, look, if you don't do what I want, we're going to attack. And his rhetoric is consistent with that as well. And I think a lot of this negotiations is about establishing a record for the world that he did what he could to get a peaceful resolution. And I think it's all been very
Jim,
smart.
you just reminded me, before W ordered the invasion in Iraq, we tried 6 ways to Sunday to get Saddam to let us know he didn't have WMD, and he wouldn't do it. In fact, he tricked himself into it. And he didn't have WMD, but he tricked us, he tricked the world, and he wouldn't take advantage, he wouldn't open up the sites. So Iran, it's not hard, but I don't think he said, I wouldn't say waved him off, so I don't think he waved him off.
You know, I think the Israelis know what he's doing. Naturally, they're nervous. This is an existential question for them. They see a tremendous opportunity. I just don't think it matters. Look, I want to be fair to the Times. It's a big story. Witkoff has said some things that suggest that the administration may be walking back its position, but it doesn't matter whether Steve Witkoff understands everything about the enrichment process. This is my view, and I just wish people would give Trump the benefit of the doubt that at least he understands negotiation. So remember, the original letter he sent to the Supreme Leader was on March 5th, and he said you got 60 days to come to a peace agreement. Well, we're not at the end of the 60 days yet.
And there's a meeting in Rome this weekend, and 2 days ago he said, I think they're tapping on it. And I don't know what that means other than, developers know when they're getting played. And he thinks he's being played, and he's not going to be played.
This is what I think. I'm going to be very, very surprised. Number one, if the Iranians agree to actually break down the nuclear infrastructure. Now, if they ever would do that, it's under these circumstances. Because if this is a situation where if this attack occurs, and it occurs and is as extensive as I think it's going to be, it could bring down the regime. And the one thing that could cause Iran to end its nuclear infrastructure is if it believes the alternative is the regime's going down.
In 2007, a leak from the intelligence community said that Iran had abandoned its nuclear program, a leak that was intended to, and in fact did, disrupt any plans to take out their nuclear program then. I don't think we would be fooled a second time. Do you?
No, and there's another factor here. Remember, in the past, Iran has always had the threat of responding to a direct attack against its nuclear infrastructure by unleashing its ring of fire around the Middle East. Well, they don't have it anymore. Hamas is destroyed. Hezbollah is heavily degraded. I mean, they're a paper tiger. Syria is gone, and now we're taking out the Houthis, which was the last remaining. The Houthis have long-range missiles, but we're taking those out now, and I don't think that's an accident either. So Iran is defenseless. Their S-300s are basically gone. There may be a couple that are left, but Israel will take that out on the first day of the war. What will happen? The Israelis' F-35s will be the first day of the war plane. They'll take out the remaining air defenses, and then the B-2s will go in. I mean, it's so obvious I can see it.
Yeah, it's not a secret. It's just a question of whether he'll do it, and I think he will. Let me ask you quickly, Jim. The Hamas rejected any settlement. What do you think Israel does now?
I think Israel continues its attack with greater intensity. And I agree with Michael Oren. I think that they are going to expand they're going to take land from Gaza in the service of expanding their buffer zones. And I like that idea. I think that's something Hamas cares about. Hamas as an organized military force has been destroyed, but if there isn't a solution along the lines President Trump has proposed, then Israel's simply going to continue attacking and reserve the right to go in whenever they feel they need to.
Senator Talent, you followed the Harvard controversy. I've done nothing but talk about it. What do you think?
I think the chickens are coming home to roost, as was probably inevitable at some point. Long ago in the midst of time when I had semi-honest work and was a lawyer as opposed to a politician, I practiced personnel law, and I was pretty familiar with the Civil Rights Act. And and I know that the Civil Rights Act does not say you can discriminate in favor of certain protected categories. It says you cannot make decisions based on the proscribed characteristics. That's what it says. That is settled law. And that is exactly what these universities have been doing for years and years. And I know also, that when the Trump administration sues them and gets into discovery, what they're going to find. I mean, they're going to find what Students for Fair Admission found in the Harvard case. This is going to be all over the record.
I don't understand.
Listen, if they continue,
their interim president could have sent back a peace offer, but he didn't. So he wants a fight. I don't know why, but they want to fight. I said, okay, give him a fight. Do you agree with that approach?
Because no, but in their world and among their networks, if fighting Donald Trump makes them heroes, regardless of what the law is, they can spin this out a long time. But look, if they are recalcitrant offenders, if they have a pattern and practice of offending against the civil rights laws, it is within the equitable powers of the district court to take over parts of the university to ensure that they stop. I mean, they are running the risk of not being in control of their admissions process or their process for investigating complaints. I mean, this happened, as you know, to school districts.
Yeah, no better way to end it. I hope Harvard is listening. Jim Talent, happy Easter to you, my friend. And Dwayne, did you talk about that at length with Jim?
We did talk about it at length, and he said, look, Harvard is running into having a special master appointed for large chunks of running that college.
That'd be great. On Dwayne's World? Is that on Dwayne's World?
It's out today.
All right, new edition of Dwayne's World for a longer discussion from someone who actually knows what he's talking about on the matter of special masters, Jim Talent and Dwayne on Dwayne's World.